Hello everyone, it's Mr. Nobody bringing you another episode of Making Nobody Happy. Today I want to talk about the value of parents and the failure of their substitutes. Now, the great contribution of parenthood is the ability to convey the greatest depth of love in complement with the greatest of expectations. Nothing less is sufficient to raise human beings to their fullest potential. And neither separately, each of those two things I mentioned, is a stable strategy. It's only by advancing them together in balance that the greatest levels of growth are possible. And the primary productive limit of each of them is the measure that you possess of the other. In other words, it's the relationship and the dialogue between the parents that determines the potential of their products, of their children, in so many ways. At least insofar as the parents have the ability to influence the outcomes of their children. Now, the reason that the government makes such a poor substitute for either is its inability to convey either love or expectations in a meaningful way. It's hard to perceive the love and care in the bureaucracy of your monthly distribution of benefits from the state. The love of Big Brother is too distant and too abstract to mean much. It's like the love of a cage wire monkey dispensing milk but starving the sensibilities of those in its care. Similarly, the expectations of the state are too distant and too inhuman to carry much weight, except for their punitive value. They might convince you to do just enough to avoid punishment or earn basic rewards, but for most people, they'll fail to profit much in their character. The courage of communism was a machine gun at your back. The enforced expectations are be punished, rather than true internalized heroism. That tends to result in a sort of race to the bottom. How can we all get to the minimum level that avoids being censored or punished? It doesn't really inspire you to reach the greatest of your potentials. So even in a less extreme culture than that, one like our own, the government's often provided as a remedy for those lacks in either support or expectations that exist in the lives of its citizens, either because someone lacks parents, or maybe they lack parents who are able to effectively meet those needs. And you shouldn't underestimate what a demanding and difficult job it is, and what a hard balance it is to maintain between those two things, even with two people who are constantly there and constantly in touch with each other. I mean, how much harder is that for giant, faceless, impersonal bureaucracies? And although it is well and kindly meant, the government's effectiveness as either a caring mother or a paternalistic father is very limited. The state can't love you, nor can it make you better than you are. Neither better circumstances nor better character flow from the fountain of government administration. The view of the founding fathers, rather, was that the role of government was to protect the means of production, which belonged to the individual citizenry. And there's always a temptation to try to provide through administration what some people miss by bad fortune. And it is kind to attempt to provide some of what a lack of motherhood or fatherhood has failed to produce. And I wish it were just as simple as that. But several problems actually arise, often unforeseen, when we're trying to do so, when we're engaged in that business of trying to make up for that. First, some people might not realize what it is that they're actually trying to replace. And if you don't, you might misunderstand both the poverty you're attempting to fill and the solution you're attempting to provide. Both a misunderstood disease and a misunderstood virtue are terribly dangerous things to leverage the immense blind power of the state for or against. Second, people might have an inaccurate idea of how much the state is actually able to convey the benefits of love or the benefits of expectations that your parents provide to you. They might believe that the state can and should be able to do it just as good, maybe even better than individual humans. And then people might be upset when they perceive the lackluster results and so misinterpret the reasons for them. And this will likely result in much outrage and wringing of hands, as well as manipulation of the system and its parameters, and trying to get more control and more funding and mess around even more. Blame and punishment will be widely assigned, but the benefits will be very unevenly accrued. And the nature of the pathology of the systems won't really be comprehended in the midst of all that. So, third thing that could happen is the state might become an actual competitor to individual care and discipline. This is perhaps the most tangled and complex and realistic risk in a society like ours that has a lot of things that we try to do for people. To our credit. This risk, though, it's such a big and subtle risk that it's not easy to address or just talk about or explore in any really pithy way. Its effects don't come from the direct production of negative outcomes, but from the dislocation of investment into less productive or appropriate means. So it's an effect produced by stealing or subverting or diverting potential. It's a false idol. It's a bad investment, or a mismatched tool. So its danger is primarily in the incorrect quantity of power and value assigned to it, and the amount of devotion and investment that it steals away from better objects. Fourth, people might decide that parental love or parental discipline are actually negative features of human life and desire to replace them with administrative love and administrative discipline, where the state runs everything, so as to secure a more, even result than you would get from relying on the variability of individual parents. We want everyone to have access to that, so we're just going to institutionalize it all. We're going to say everyone will have the same thing. It will all be provided by the state. Now that can lead to the ideological abolishment in many ways of the family, which is the best, most historically proven method among humans for conveying love and conveying expectations. It'd be a violation of our most basic human rights and dignity. It's striking to the fundamental nature of what it means to be human. Now, of course, it's understandable why you might want to do that. Parents are themselves a very uneven and unreliable means of conveying love and expectations, obviously. We all have parents. Many of us have been parents. And if we've learned anything from thousands of generations of human life, it's that people are imperfect vessels for their own good intentions. The question isn't whether parenthood is imperfect and thus corrupt and should be, rejected and discarded, but considering that all human means of conveyance, including government, like humans themselves, are at least somewhat corrupt and imperfect, which of them has the greatest innate power and potential? The real question is, what is the best means that we have for the conveyance of love and expectations? And I would say it is the family. Now, partly that question has been answered it can be answered by theory, by discussion, by all kinds of argumentation, but it's also an empirical question. And I think it has been answered empirically and continues to be answered to this day. Nature provides you, to begin with two parents, each of whom share equally in humanity and in the conveyance of all your needs, but they can subspecialize according to their psychological temperament and their biological capabilities in their general roles. It's important enough and powerful enough, this thing, the family, that it's actually innate to the nature of our reproduction. We just are naturally come into it. It's something that is universal across humanity and throughout time. And in many ways, not even unique to our species. Of course, it takes, a particular form in our species, but you go to other smart mammals like us, like wolves, ravens, elephants, so many other things. They're families. That's what us mammals do. That's what makes mammals awesome, is the power of the family. And you really see it in those sophisticated animals, the power of the pack. And that is something that we as humans really have. Now, you were born with that. That is something innate to us. That is something that's so useful and so amazing that it was valuable enough to build right in. So yeah, if it's that effective, if it has won out that effectively, then it probably has some value. Nothing else, none of these other things are innate. You will find the family everywhere on Earth, but you'll find all kinds of different economic, political, structural, administrative things. You'll find enormous variation of that all over the world. Tons of different ways of doing things, which most of them are just scaled up iterations of the family, frankly. That would be my central thesis, is all of those higher things are just abstractions and iterations on this original fundamental social structure that is actually universal, innate, that you do actually find everywhere. So that's what really sits at the bottom, and it's proved itself very practically. It's been incredibly effective. Now, if you lose one of your parents, this is something we know, that through death or abandonment or some sort of, pathology among you, we know that you've really lost something. Like, people know that's a big loss. It's a big deal. Now, you can try to make up for that with state services, with grandparents, with step-parents, with foster care, with siblings. What you see there is most of our solutions basically consist of substitutionary individuals, of the nearest available person, to try and make it be like the thing that it was. And of course, that's what it should be. That is the nearest equivalent we can find to the provision of nature. Just like when we try to make baby formula, we try to make it as close as possible to the formula of breast milk, because the thing that has been provided by nature is the best thing. It is the perfect thing for us. Now, state services, those are the furthest removed from the provision of nature in many ways. Those are, unless you can have robots doing it for you, but it's not that different when so much of it is just done, electronically these days anyway, through the mail, through internet services, a depersonalization of it. So much of the care that the government can provide for you is extremely extracted, extremely removed from the provision of nature, the furthest away from it. Now, in some ways, having it be that way is actually useful. It's useful because it demands the least sacrifice from specific individuals. You don't have a grandmother who has to commit her entire life to raising you. Instead, we'll have the state take up some of that. So, yeah, it's useful in that way. It saves some people from having to drastically alter the lives that they might have had to care for someone. But you also, from the state, get the least similar substitute, the thing that is least like the thing that you've lost. And just in the same way that rat babies provided with all the food and water, excuse me, sorry. So, as I was saying, just like rat babies that are provided with all the food and water that they need in the absence of parental care will still die. Humans, provided with all the apparent needs of provision and direction by the state, will still suffer and grow pitifully in the absence of meaningful human-scale relationships. You can like I said, this is the true thing about rats. You can give them everything that they need, rat babies, to live, and they'll still die. unless they have that actual tangible parental care. Basically, you need to come down and you need to stroke them and you need to tickle them and play with them and have a relationship with them in some way. And if a human does that, that can make the difference. But of course, what they're really missing is their family. But that's the shocking thing. You can provide an animals, this is especially true with mammals, give them everything they need, but if they don't have a relationship with some sort of parent, they will die. And I did bring up the wireframe monkeys. That's another example of how desperate the needs are for this human level connection. Well, this familial connection, even in these other animals, there's this need for the familial connection. There's something in them that's innately looking for it. And for a lot of animals, they'll just straight up die. Their bodies, even with everything they need, just give up. Now, humans might hang on more, but that doesn't mean they're going to grow in the way that they could have grown. You know, we're like that. Just because the state can keep you alive and give you what it seems like you need doesn't mean it can really give you the thing that something deep in you is expecting to be there. So, you know, the expansive greatness and power of the state just doesn't translate into meaningful long-term impacts on the human spirit. And if you tell people that it should, but they're still suffering, they're going to start looking for someone to blame, and they won't understand who or what has gone wrong. Because it would seem like, why did it go wrong? We did everything that needed to be done. We gave everything that needed to be given. And even the people who it's being given to, they won't understand necessarily what it is that's being replaced and how it is falling short of the actual thing that it should be replacing it, and the ways that they are suffering, so that they're just not growing, they're not responding, they don't feel it. So we live in a world where the starting points and our ongoing efforts are very unevenly distributed, in which we can't be certain of the amount of care or discipline that any given set of parents are going to be able to provide. And we do have to ask ourselves, how should we respond? Surely it's in the general interest to alleviate as much as is actually possible unnecessary suffering, which is kind of a problematic term that we can't go into right now. Maybe a better term would be amenable suffering, suffering that it is in our power to relieve. I think that might be a better way to put it. But because the primary means for the active reduction of suffering and the production of love and expectations is individual care in parenthood, we have to be really careful not to enact any policies that might undermine its operation by means of any of the four dangers that I listed earlier, and any others that I might have skipped, because I'm sure there are many more. I just, rattled off a few. Our first and highest, I don't say the only, but our highest concern should be to protect the capacity of those engines of production to operate, to protect the function of the family, and not to attempt to legislate half-cocked substitutes into existence. That is the wrong approach to take. That is something even as we go to try and help, we need to keep that in mind, that our highest duty is to protect the protective engine and fundamental franchise of the family for humans, and not to try to make ourselves heroes by trying to replace it. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people see the business of government these days as being the production of outcomes rather than protecting the means of production. And that's the key difference between the American system of government and that of like a utopian state, like the French Revolutionary government or the Soviet socialist government. They saw themselves as in the business of directly producing the good outcomes, directly producing the utopia, the letting the state create all things perfect and providing for everyone. And that was especially the Soviet vision, and was used in many other countries of that type. Whereas, like I said, the American vision was more that the state can't do that, that just belongs for you as your right to pursue it, and the state's job is just to safeguard your right to pursue it, to set up conditions to help you pursue it, not to try and actually produce it by its own actions. Now, parenthood and development of the individual can work. It works amazingly well when it's working. It can be incredibly powerful, can be incredibly durable. There's families who have had multi-generational legacies from a couple amazing individuals that just spread and multiplied across history, across whole nations. And we just haven't yet developed an effective substitute for it. We haven't yet developed a technological substitute for the family itself. So whatever other steps we may need to take to try and make things better in the society, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be other steps. Our greatest investment should be in the protection of the family. If for no other reason than that individuals appear to have a capacity for conveying these most basic human needs in a very effective, meaningful, and balanced way in a family, scaled to the appropriate level of human experience and individual uniqueness that the state simply does not possess. There's also an amazing, so the level of detail and adaptivity and appropriateness and maintaining that balance between love and expectations, the family's just way better than the government's going to be. They don't have time for that. And then the other thing about it too is not making those catastrophic mistakes. Also, there's a big issue of efficiency. The having it right there in the home, the efficiency. There, at the economies of scale, sometimes you get efficiencies. Sometimes you get massive inefficiencies as a thing becomes a big, bloated, blind monster that has so much in it that it can't really even see what it's doing, and has so much to manage and so many resources it doesn't even know how it's spending them. And the response times become so slow because the brain is so far away from the tail. It takes forever for the messages to go back and forth. And it's so hard to change anything. It's so hard once something's established to make any modification to it because it's this vast bureaucracy. Whereas in a family, you can be pretty quick and pretty adaptable on those sorts of things, So the efficiency and adaptability, it's down there. That's another great feature of the family. The state is an abstraction, and it's hard to interact with either love or discipline from an abstraction. The state might be useful for throwing up large-scale, even featureless walls around certain problems, poverties, behaviors, but it can't approach us and really meet us where we live. It remains high and far off and impersonal. So its interventions can't reach us in our inmost being. It can't develop us into the kind of person who develops the means for provision for those needs within themselves. It doesn't easily touch or inhabit our character. And that's something that our family really does do. Our parents are the things that produced us. They literally inhabit us. We are part of them and they are part of us. We see them, we receive from them, and as we get older and we grow, we see who we are, we see who they are, we discover them in ourselves, both literally and figuratively. By seeing the love and the expectations expressed in their lives, we discover how they could be connected to them in us, and how they can be imitated and inhabited in us. They walk the path ahead of us that leads us into it. They draw us into it by this connection between who we are. Love and discipline in them, that I see in them, can be internalized. It can be moved from them into me. It can become love and discipline in me. I can take the strengths of my parents and bring them into myself. And we become able to generate those capacities ourselves by finding that connection between us and in the way that they help us specifically and individually to discover that connection. In the same way, our parents hand down their genetic capacities to us, and they give us the ability to also hand them down to others by reproduction, obviously, but also we reproduce our culture, we reproduce our attitudes, we reproduce our wisdom. We pass things down in the family as an example, that inhabitation that's inherited. Our parents hand on to us that cultural knowledge of how to express the power of love and discipline in our own lives by showing it to us in their lives, by showing it to us as their children. They show us how to discover it and develop it and maintain it and then pass it on again to even more people. It becomes something that grows and spreads and grows and spreads completely organically. So the truth is, the family is the fundamental unit of government. It is the fundamental unit of human society, of human maturation, the process of growing up. It's the fundamental home of education and of production, or at least the development of productivity, of becoming the kind of person who can become something, who can make things, who can do things. That's where we become who we are. Humans take, especially compared to a lot of other creatures, a very long time to mature. And it takes a long time to raise that next generation. And we have to invest an awful amount into that process. Because of our continued existence and the quality of our existence depends so much on that process. Historically, we've invested a lot at the state level, whatever kind of state we have, in promoting and protecting and preserving the family, because that's where the business of becoming human is happening. It's this huge, long, drawn-out process for which we are specially provided. And so, not just in America, but in so many cultures, the culture, the tribe, you go there and you say how much of the rituals of your culture are built around moments of family, moments of this maturity, protecting these rights within the family, the structure of the family, the relationships between mothers and fathers, how much of your wisdom is about that, and parents and children, brothers and sisters. It's an enormous amount. It's the highest duty in many cases of the state, because the state is a collective sort of abstraction we put together to help protect the true fundamental government and education and economy for all of us, which actually is our family. And it's something that is really is worth protecting, because it is something that isn't invincible, and it is partly also just because we're human. It is more conditional. We have this ability to choose. We have an immense amount of freedom. We can know things. We can forget things. It only takes one generation. This is why it's so important to pass on this understanding of the family that's been so dearly bought, because it really only takes one generation to break that chain of handing down everything that has been acquired and everything that has been learned. And that can damage a society in a way that becomes extremely hard to recover from. It's a lot easier to break things down than it is to build them up. And a society that makes no provision for the production of the next generation to come after them is in denial about the state of existence. It's in denial about its own mortality and the inexorable movement of time. And they will cease to exist as they are, just out of necessity, without any special effort to prevent it. Things will naturally disappear. If people don't put in a special effort to continue, it'd be very easy. The natural order of the universe is, it's kind of out to destroy you. It's entropy. It's a harsh world. I know sometimes things seem so wonderful right now for this brief little period of security that we've managed to win for ourselves, that seems impossible. But it's a unique moment in time, and maybe it's only a unique moment in your life, or even maybe just in your area. It doesn't take very much to fall out of that moment of time, whether in your personal life or in the life of your country, or to fall out of that safe place, wherever you live. It's very easy to suddenly end up in a place of danger when you let the things that protect you and preserve you fall apart. This is a key but hard to hear structural factor about life and about civilizations. And that is that a society will not, by its nature, persist or remain stable, much less grow, because every generation is aging and weakening and dying, and there are no exceptions. And if you do not pay the price in the present that is necessary to produce the future of your society will cease to exist and will likely degrade even in your lifetime as your powers to maintain your position wane toward the end of your life. We're going to find out what that looks like in the next 100 years. I don't know if any of you have studied much about demography or the things that are changing, and it's very easy to say, no big deal, because it's no big deal now. Nothing's a big deal until it arrives. And we don't know what's coming exactly, but it seems very likely we're going to find out. There are a whole bunch of countries heading off of a demographic cliff right now. They have not prepared for the future of their society, of their civilization. And we don't really know what's going to happen to them. And it's quite possible that the consequences of it will catch up to these people, not sometime in the future, but actually in the later stages of their own lifetime when half the population of the country is too old to work. Anyway, now because such movements rarely happen wholesale or perfectly evenly, it's very unlikely that any society would just end overnight. That's not usually how things go. But the life that country has enjoyed won't remain stable. It won't persist against the entropic forces of the universe without a deliberate anti-entropic effort, including one that is able to transcend the inevitable waning of our own strength and our own presence here alive on Earth. Each generation has to find it in themselves to maintain the love and the care and the expectations and the discipline that provide for the life of mankind. Each generation has to inherit those capacities from the generation before them, and each generation learns them best and most easily from the generation that produced them. And that they inherited from the generation before them. And you most easily will inhabit either poverty or riches from the generation before you. And then you have to decide what you're going to hand on. And it's not like you can't improve things. There have been plenty of generations who have handed on more than they received. And that has always been the goal of so many generations, because they didn't see themselves as the end point of history. They saw themselves as another stage in a relay race. You receive what has come before, and you are trying to hand on something even better. You are making an investment in the future, in those future generations. It takes you beyond yourself. So each generation, in turn, shoulders the burden of present being and the cost of the future and the inheritance of the past. Those are the three things. There's right now, the burden of working. We're in the right now. We have this inheritance of riches from the past. And then we have an investment we want to make into the future. And the greatest question that we face right now is, how are we addressing that equation? Are we willing to pay the price of the future? Are we making the proper investments? Are we making use of the inheritance of the past, whatever they are? Are we spending them? Are we squandering them? Are we treasuring them? Are we wasting them? Do we recognize what it took to get them to us? Do we understand and do we respond to the inheritance we have from the past? Do we take everything that we could really take from it? And most importantly, do we shoulder the burden of the present that lies in this just eternal moment of right now that is before us? We cannot, after all, place all of our hopes and investments in some other time. The past is gone beyond our ability to reach it or to alter it, and the future hasn't yet come. But we touch them both in the present. We meet the legacy of the past, and we propel it into the future through our present action. Both the past and the present are of inestimable value, but if they I said that wrong. Both the past and the future, they are of inestimable value. That's who we were, and that's who we're going to be. And we always have to keep our eyes on them. But if they distract us from our main aim, which is shouldering their burden, receiving what they give us, and moving that on into the future and the present, then we're seeking to live and affect change in a time that is beyond our reach. You can't fix the past. It's already happened. And you can't bet absolutely everything on the future because it isn't yet. You have to live now. It's not that the past and the future don't exist or don't matter. They're extremely important, but it is now that we have to live. And in the now, our greatest question is, how are we shouldering the burden of the present by developing that capacity within ourselves for love and discipline and expressing that in our families? How are we becoming the productive individuals that our parents were, or maybe even failed to be, but that we've learned from their mistakes, perhaps? How can we develop those capacities effectively so we can demonstrate it in our own lives as the children of our parents, as the brothers and sisters, and eventually, hopefully, hand that capacity on to the next generation that is to come? Now that's really the meat of what I have to say. This is the business of what we're up to, and this is something that is such a deep and important human thing. And it's not a responsibility we can just pawn off onto some abstraction or some machine, because in some ways a bureaucracy is a little bit like a machine we've constructed. This isn't something we can just hand off to a machine, and this isn't a responsibility we can just abdicate, because we might say, well, I just want me now, and I think it really just should end with me, and I'm all that matters. I'm not really concerned about participating in this family thing or perpetuating it. And that's fine. And different things happen to different people have different callings and different roles, but it's still the perpetuation of the family is the fundamental business of humankind. So someone's got to be doing it, and someone's got to be helping it happen and making sure it happens and protecting its function, because there's a lot of things that go on. There's a lot of things we do. There's a lot of different roles we can play. But if this role doesn't get taken care of, if it doesn't get protected, then everything else is going to eventually come apart. This is just sort of on an aside. You could skip out right now, but this is just to sort of explore the ideas more. Something that I've actually written about previously. I've actually worked out, and I know I talked a lot about love and discipline, or love and expectations. You might wonder why those two things. Why do you pick those two things as like the key things? And it's something that I've actually thought about and written about, and I've developed these arguments, which I'll get around to and do an episode on sometime, about why I think that love and discipline are actually the essential and complementary animating factors that produce and describe human development. I think they correspond roughly to the human qualities, which are kind of problematic qualities of individuality and choice. The world that we find ourselves in and our response to it. The orientation toward the world as we wish it to be, and the world as it must be confronted. So although they're shared and produced and needed by all of mankind, and to some degree we all possess them within us, they're also can be conceived of as like an anima and animus, if I was to get psychological on you, or as mythologically feminine and masculine, if you want to use archetypes, for example. They're in a kind of marriage that produces human growth and development and continuation, just like the marriage of actual human cells and bodies and lives does. So human society is essentially a marriage between these two halves of humanity, this anima and animus, both genetically, biologically, psychologically, sociologically, like this pattern, this sort of, you can picture it as like a yin-yang sort of pattern. Like it's written from the very bottom, from the lowest thing, from the smallest scale up to the highest scale, from the largest writing to the smallest writing. From a single strand of DNA right up to the collective unity of the whole species. It's something that's imprinted through it. And the maintenance and protection of that marriage that stands across all levels of human expression is the first duty of humankind. And so it is also the first duty of the state, because everything else depends on it. It's far from the only duty, but shirking this one inevitably degrades and frustrates all the others. That marriage, that unity, this unity of these two halves, it inherently centers around the production and development of individuals, and it's a clue to the dignity, importance, and centrality of the individual. It is it's the most appropriate level for human intervention. It's where it's, what's the word I'm looking for? Catholics would use a word like a sacrament, meaning a tangible place where we encounter the divine, something greater, something of vast extent, something of mystical significance, something whose thread runs through the nature of our being and our experience. And they would say a sacrament is something that we, some tangible meeting place, something we can encounter that directly helps present it to us. And I think that that's what you experience. This is a place in a family where we meet these forces of past and future, and we interact with them on very meaningful terms. It's where we live. It's where life is to be found. It's where the past comes to create this thing, and we discover it, and where we create this new future. Now, as I've said, I think that the refusal to accept that inheritance or our present burden or the price that needs to be paid of either the past, the present, the future, it's not going to end with our long-term flourishing. They must all be integrated. They must all be brought into harmony and meaning in our present lives. The lessons of the past have to be extracted so that it can be laid to rest as our foundation, and the soil and the seeds of the future have to be planted in our present lives. And we must water it all with love and discipline in the present, because both love and discipline, reach from the present into the past and into the future for who we are and who we wish to be, for the world as it ought to be, and for ourselves as we ought to be, for us as we are and the world as it is. That's why those are the tools that we use. They both quiet our heart and send us forward. They both reassure us and refine us, and they do it together, and they do it in a cycle, in a complete cycle. They balance each other. And it works so well in something like a family, because love and discipline in a family interact with you on the level of the individual. Love reaches you as an individual. Discipline guides you as an individual, as you. It finds you, who you are, where you can be. It brings the past with it. It has a vision that is learned from that past, from what I've seen who my parents can become and who they helped me. That helps me guide my children and who they're going to become. There's this wonderful continuity of there. I see who they can be, and I can see who they are, and I'm also learning at the same time. It's this wonderful chain, and there's so much knowledge and power to be gained from it. Love and discipline take you as an individual and love you for who you are, for the legacy of your past, just for being. But they also see your potential, who you could be, and love you too much to just leave you how you are. You know, they've learned the hard lessons of the past, and you see what needs to be done. And you have these expectations that help lift you up into that destiny and help discipline you to achieve it. They give us the strength and the sustenance to survive the past and the future, and to give us power and focus to respond to and make use of the past and shape the future. One supports us while the other challenges us and develops our strength by making us lift something. You know, together we reach higher and higher states of being in that way against the arrayed forces of entropy. It wouldn't be enough just to have one. If you just had one, it's these forces of entropy and you're getting extra pushing down, that's just going to crush you. But if you're just being protected, if you're just being coddled, just being loved, you never gain that strength that was applied carefully at the right time in just the right amounts to make you able to lift, to push, so that your limbs are strong, so that you've had to actually become something. Neither love nor discipline alone can sustain us against the forces of entropy. One gives everything, and one demands everything. On their own, neither would raise us very far. Without the gentle rain to water us, we would wither. And without the fire of the sun to draw us up from our roots to meet its rays, we'd have no vigor. A dried stalk or a soggy mass of roots would be the only result. It's the pathology of one of them to be tyrannically harsh and of the other to be softly devouring and degrading. It's only in combination that they find their balance. And they produce the life of mankind. The power of the sun drives that anti-fragile response that draws the water up from the roots into the stems and leaves and out through the process of respiration. Together they make a cycle where fire and water become sustaining forces instead of degrading ones. That's just some of my waxing a little poetic on that subject. That's all for today. I'll let you leave on that to think about that if you feel like it. So long.